okay with it, we're going to record our session as Melissa has hit the record button. And I would remind everybody to mute yourself once Bradley begins, and then you can unmute when we start Q&A. A couple of things I want to mention to you right off the bat. We certainly want to be prayerful for David Topping and his family and the loss of Martha, and all of the others the many others that are on our prayer list. I don't know, some of you may remember Dr. Ray Allen, who was the interim at Grandin Court prior to my coming, was a longtime pastor at Blacksburg Baptist Church, where I'm sure Bradley remembers the name. Ray has had a stroke, and he is in the hospital at Carilion, and Cindy saw him and visited with him today. Mentally, he's doing okay. He's having difficulty with his speech and is paralyzed on one side. And so Cindy visited with he and his daughter, Ann, today. And so if you would keep that family, they've had a lot on them with the injury to his grandson. And so be much in prayer for that family, if you would, please. And really quick, is there any others that we need to be mindful of? All right, hearing none. Yeah, Ed?
Just a real long-time friend of mine named Al Britt, who is in the hospital in Maryland in a what do you call it? Enforced medically induced coma. He had a heart stoppage, and just a great guy, and I love him and request prayers for him.
All right, you got it. Well, we had a great conversation last week, Bradley and I did, and it was just good to catch up with him on the phone, and we talked about different things, and I thought it would be great when we were planning these out to have a medical expert to share with us, and he told me some great stories, and I just said, just tell some stories, Bradley, and from your perspective and some of the things that you see that's going on, and hopefully that'll help us, and then we can ask questions at the end of it. So Bradley, you're on.
Great. Hey guys, I hope everybody's doing well. I don't know, just tell you a little bit about where I'm at. I'm here in Greensboro. Folks that may or may not know me, I'm a pulmonary critical care doc that did my training in Roanoke and spent a couple of years there at Grandin Court. We moved away about, I guess it's been over a year now, back in June. I can't believe it, but we've been down here a little over a year, and definitely my first year out of fellowship, I didn't expect to run into a significant change in the landscape of healthcare as we've seen this past year. And I think that's something that has been definitely eye-opening just for the past year. But here in Greensboro, we have we started out with quite a few patients that started to present with symptoms that weren't easily explained and what was going on, even at the end of February, first part of March. And then the hospital system that I worked for was, I work at Cone Health, and we started at that point getting an opportunity to come together and talk about what we were going to do and making plans. And it's been very good just to be a part of that organization, to be able to think about this and how we were going to go about it, because there was a lot of fear that when we started seeing advice from CDC, the advice from the health departments, and the information that was coming to us and almost changing daily, there was a lot of that. And I think that extends, of course, not from our side, but all the way to the bedside and to patients and families and stuff at home, because when things change rapidly, we have to make decisions on stuff that, is fact-based if we can. And most of the time we didn't know the answer, and not knowing the answer when things are scary are difficult, and it's difficult for patients and patients' families. And I happen to be in the medical ICU during that time when we first started having our first positive results appear. And that was a different world. It took a lot of time. At first, just talking to staff, right, and making sure that staff understood what the plan was, right. And we had people that didn't know if they could do what they were doing because they had, so much anxiety and unknown. But the things that we did know, we needed to, always act upon. The things that we knew that would keep us safe, the regular use of PPE, and, there's so much hype in the media about not having the things we need or hospitals not having stuff that they need. Fortunately, we've never experienced that. Now, granted, we did need to do things to make sure we were conserving what we had and not be wasteful. It hopefully, after all of this is done, hospital systems will be continuing to use that same mentality to not be wasteful. But I think one of the things that highlighted the most for me was the immediate shutdown of interaction with family. And you don't understand, or at least I didn't understand, how difficult it was to have that kind of interaction and conversation without seeing somebody's face and mannerisms, and to call and speak to folks and give them those updates. There was many days that I spent anywhere between 4 to 5 hours of the time, even in the hospital, just on phone time, discussing what was happening with patients and their family. And if we could, FaceTiming and using computer, just what we're doing now. We have a system there that can hook through our electronic healthcare records. So that was also helpful to be able to video with patients. But even early on, patients that were sick or even passing away from the disease, family members being scared to come to the hospital, and patients dying alone. That was very tough. That was a time that we just didn't understand what to do at that point. And there was not just discussions and kind of debriefings and all, time to grieve with family, but just with the staff. It was hard on the bedside nurse that may spend. There was sometimes that they would spend 4 or 5 hours in a room at a bedside because it was just easier to be in there than it was to take everything off and come back outside. So they're all dressed up. It's easier just to kind of stay in. And I know that the Roanoke area, I have some friends that I've spoke with about the Roanoke area that has seen a more uptick in cases recently. And it even more so as, we see patients here, there was also more fear that even comes, when there's mask mandates and recommendations for closure of stuff and large gatherings and groups. And, it's not a secret, but there's definitely been church groups that have had outbreaks within small or within gatherings, choirs that have, had this issue. I know there was a big release from one back, out in Washington State, or I believe, or Oregon. But these are all scary things. And what has happened is that we've kind of shed light on what happens regularly on a day-to-day basis, but it's now publicized, meaning that, every year, every flu season that we go to Walmart or to Target or any public venue, there's a lot of people going through, our bodies are exposed to infectious disease. We're exposed to all of these things. And we really take for granted how miraculously engineered our immunology is designed. I mean, it's, people write lots and lots of books of them, and I keep a whole bunch over there on a shelf that are collecting dust currently. But it's amazing to think about how that even happens, how you could be exposed to something, how it could spread so quickly. And it does happen. It's the reason why, kindergartners come in every 2 weeks with some additional cold symptom. But we don't die from those because our body's able to fight that kind of thing off. This particular virus is different than that. And the reason being is that it's listed as novel, and a lot of people see that word before it and don't necessarily understand what novel means. And in the setting of a virus like this, it's novel, meaning that its RNA sequence, or what makes it programmed to do what it does, is not ever been really exposed to the human race before. Of course, we've been exposed to coronaviruses out there because, pretty sure that everyone that's had kids and has picked up a cold from them has probably been a coronavirus or rhinovirus or human metapneumovirus. Any of those, you name them, have had those. But this particular one doesn't have any prior existence to us. So it's highly contagious in the fact that we don't have any of those antibodies. So that's why half of we don't lose so many people every year to the flu every year, because we innately carry some antibodies to different flu viruses. And even though when we do have pandemics like the H1N1, it doesn't exceed its bounds as much as the coronavirus has this year. Unlike what happened in the 1918, 1920 influenza time. Now, also medical care has changed a lot since then. So we would hope to think that we do a better job. But there was, let me tell you, plenty of times, especially during those first couple of weeks, that I think the right description was helplessness, because there wasn't a lot of clear direction, and there wasn't a lot of clear direction from anybody. There wasn't good guidance on what we should do. There wasn't good guidance on how we should treat them. And when I say that meaning like when we think of treatments that are like curative, like, can I give a patient something that would reverse this process, or can I give a patient something that would make it better? So we just kind of had to stick with the basics of critical care medicine, which is regressive supportive care, life support measures, all those kind of things with patients on ventilators. We actually learned later on that, intubation and placing patients on mechanical life support is probably the last thing we need to be doing, because these patients do a little bit better if we could keep them off of mechanical support for any reason. And even in our own time frame over these past several months, we're starting to learn more as we move forward. The good news is just even this week in clinic, back in clinic this week, I've seen several survivors of coronavirus this week in clinic that have come back to see us just because they're worried about whether or not something's going to happen, or if they may be having complications or still having symptoms that are extending past their time. So it is nice to see folks that have even been hospitalized and returned. Now, unfortunately, we're still dealing with the same issue as Roanoke. We're still going to have patients that come into the hospital and unfortunately don't return home to their loved ones. And we're kind of coming up with creative and innovative ways to help bridge that for families. We even if they are, we're still trying to get time with them to visit with the families if we can. But having that palliative type discussion and end of life care discussion via phone is definitely something that I don't know if I ever thought that we would have to do, because that's such a different time. And I know that Kevin and others have done that kind of discussion at the bedside with people that they've come to visit in the hospital. But imagine, and Cindy, you know, of course she's doing that in 8 Mountain there at Carillion. So that's a very different situation. I have been really blessed. There's one particular story. There was a situation where I guess a nurse knew this particular patient outside of the hospital setting, you know, and this particular patient came in, was very sick, ended up getting worse, ended up on life support, was continuing to decline, and the family made the decision to remove him from support and let him pass because they knew he wasn't going to survive, and we helped them through that. But you know, that this particular nurse is very you know, she's very strong in her faith, and seeing how she handled that, she knew that family and everything. And I even shared this story at our Schwartz Center rounds, but I remember her, she wasn't even taking care of the patient. It wasn't even her patient, but she still, you know, gowned up, went in, sat in there with him until he passed away. And, you know, just seeing that level of compassion and understanding that she was just, it didn't matter what was happening, but she wasn't going to let him be in that room by himself, because there at the beginning, there was a lot of, it's hard to describe, but you know, the feeling of like looking through a glass, you know, aquarium, or like looking through, you know, at a zoo or something like that through the containment facility, right? You know, right? You hate to think of it that way, but the ICUs are set up in a way that there's these big glass sliding doors, everything's closed off, and it's a very disconnected management feeling, right? You know, I'm very used to walking in and touching people, right? There's something about that concept of interpretation of what's happening to a patient by feeling it, right? It's not just, I'm talking about touching everything, but I'm talking about examining a person. And now we're getting kind of limited on that. So, you know, you're having that kind of taken away from you almost. And now that's better. We've adapted to those situations to now where we're gowning up, going in and seeing patients all at once, and we're able to stay in our PPE the whole time. But you know, when that was first happening and we were trying to figure out what to do, that just led to the anxiety that, you know, that crept up amongst other partners, other physicians, I mean, you know, it's a very, when it does get stressful, you start seeing how people react, right? When things get stressful, you really start seeing how certain groups of people's responses are, and we're fortunate to see that everybody tries to step up. But I'm not going to be the, you know, definitely not going to say that I wasn't one that there was times where I was like, I don't know. I need clearer direction. I need some more information before we can make a better decision. That, you know, I wanted to make sure that what we were doing was safe. And it's been a very good growing exercise, I guess, but it's been very stressful at times. I'm sure I have more gray hair now than I did when I left, and probably losing some too. But you know, thankfully, and you know, the blessings is that we've all been safe. We have had staff sick, most of which were community spread, you know, from a sick family member that has brought it into the hospital, or like not, I mean, they have been in contact at home and then, you know, actually spread to other staff at work. We've had physicians as well sick, but those were also all community spread. So far, nothing else we know about, but you know, it's just things to think about, that we're all, you know, we're not immune to this, right? You know, the same I get questions all the time, family calls or cousins call or whatever else and ask things. And, they're like, do you go into the grocery store? Yes, we all have to eat. We must need to go to the grocery store. There's like things that you need to do and be safe with. And, I think being, just being cognizant of those surroundings and understanding that this is something that's not going anywhere anytime soon. We have a good while for that. I have no idea when this will be over. I don't think anybody does. The Lord does, but we sure don't. But we can all speculate, but I don't know if we'll ever figure that out. I hope that tells you a little bit about kind of some of the things that we've been doing here and experiencing. And any questions that I can answer, I'll be glad to give them the best shot that I can. And
so Bradley, what are you seeing as far as you mentioned those that are coming back to you after having recovered from COVID? What are you seeing, or can you talk about what some of the long-term ramifications of the virus might be, or what are some of the after medical conditions or issues that you're seeing?
I think the most common thing that we will see from this is going to be behavioral. It'll be PTSD. It will be anxiety and depression. When you look statistically at patients that are admitted to the intensive care unit, so if you look at anybody over the age of 60 to 65, the chances of developing delirium or hospital-acquired delirium, and I say the word delirium, which is a medical term for kind of a confusional state that'll occur when you're stressed out, when the body's stressed out. And that rate covers almost 30 to 40% of hospital admissions will have some delirium. And those situations on top of where we, you put somebody in a stressful situation and are hospital admitted and may or may not have the disease yet, and we don't know if they've got their test result, especially like outpatient things that have occurred for a while. But I suspect there's going to be a behavioral component of that. We don't know what that looks like yet. That's going to be a long down the road of how many people will be impacted. But beyond that, the physical ramifications, I'm not sure that we know. If it behaves similar to other ARDS type pictures, which is acute respiratory distress syndrome, those are situations where the lungs are just completely destroyed, and it takes a long time for that to recover. In its final phase of recovery, it's a kind of a fibrosis that will occur in the patient's lungs, and that takes time. It usually leaves scarring there that's permanent. And they may, at that point, if they already had decreased lung function for some other reason, could end up, requiring oxygen lifetime, or, requiring, other things that, would take time for them, if they ever recovered at all from fibrotic type problems. I think young people, or even folks that had full recovery within a short period of time, that had very minimal symptoms, most likely they'll have no other long-term outcomes. The problem is we're also seeing a lot of other unusual things that crop up. People have probably seen press releases about blood clots. People have probably seen press releases about the skin manifestations, about toes and fingers. People have probably seen stuff like that appear. The immune related disease that we're seeing in children. Once again, this is stuff that is publicized, and people will view that as being like, this is something new. These are not new things. So developing an immunogenic type reaction to fingers and toes occurs. We see that in other diseases. Okay. So it's just, we're making associations. And I guess one of the things that when stuff like this happens, we try to collect as much data as we can and try to build those associations so we learn a little bit more about it. It's also common to have blood clots in other viruses. Even during the H1N1 pandemic for patients with influenza, there is a significant number of those patients that also have blood clots. So this is just part of those disease processes and syndromes that we see. So as for that, I don't know. And long term, I think that's going to be time will tell. But I think when we look back on it and whenever they put book chapters in for this, you know, I see it now. I see it in patients that are hospitalized. You see the anxiety and fear that's there. I know that there'll be a behavioral component that will probably surpass most of it, because you got to remember 80+% of these patients, even more than that, really, if you look at the numbers, survive and do fine. It's just the small portion of these patients that that are, you know, over the age of 65 that have associated medical conditions that put them at higher risk for complication. Mm-hmm.
Hey, Bradley.
Don't forget to, yeah, I was just going to say, don't forget to unmute yourself. Who's got a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, Bradley, I was talking with Elizabeth Bale the other day. She works for the American Heart Association. And she was saying that they were seeing so many people who were coming away from COVID with more heart conditions. And I wondered if you might speak to that.
Yeah. So I guess the other thing is that when there are health problems stirring, people become a little bit more cognizant of other things too, right? So we have to think about if something has been happening. So I have actually been seeing more patients in clinic now afterwards that have telling me that they've been having certain problems that may be going on for the past, you know, year. So now, since there are things that are going on, they're like, well, maybe I actually should figure out what's happening. So there's a little bit of momentum that occurs there. Now, as for the long-term cardiac effects, we do see viral cardiomyopathies, which is just a fancy word for the heart muscle becoming weak in association to an infection. That also occurs in sepsis. And sepsis is just a fancy word for infection, like a body's response or an overwhelming response to an infection, whether that's viral or bacterial or parasitic for that matter. We don't see a whole lot of that because we're not in third world country with a lot of that problem. But these are, no matter the case, you know, I think there's going to be more people looking into those things, but then also when there is lots of medical testing occurring, right, we are better at finding lots of things, but that doesn't mean that we're really good at knowing what to do with those things, right? I have this discussion all the time when I talk to patients about lung cancer screening. Well, yes, we can screen people for lung cancer, but we also have to be ready to deal with all of the other stuff that we might find in your chest cavity that we didn't know existed, right? And so some people at the age of 75 or 80 years old may say, you know what, I don't particularly want to know, right? And they understand that concept, like, you know, well, if we were to find something, I wouldn't do anything with it. But what happens is when we do more diagnostics, we're good at finding more stuff. And that's, you know, that's the issue, is that, you know, physicians, I guess, this is my view, nobody else's view. So this is I'm going to pass this on. This is my view, probably not many people's. But, you know, that's why it's called practicing, right? You don't go catching, you go fishing, right? You don't say, I'm going to go to the lake to go catching. You're going to go to the lake to go fishing. You know, it's not, you're not acting and doing medicine, you're practicing medicine, because there isn't always a right answer. And patients a lot of time experience healthcare like checking out at Walmart or Target or any department store, because it's more of a consumer type basis thought process, because we're very consumer driven in America. And healthcare it is a consumer supply process, but it's a relationship and a decision making, right? So it's having trust that you have somebody that has taken the time to think about what's going on and then make a decision that's right for you. And so that's what's really hard, is that, as a patient, we want the consumerism response. We want the, you have this, I want to buy that. We get the answer, everybody's good, it's very checkbox. And this is a prime example where we've had something that we don't really know what to do. We don't know what expected outcomes are going to be, and now we need to start planning and thinking for that. And it's hard concept for patients to understand. It's hard concept for us to understand.
Do you have an opinion, Bradley, about children and their exposure and school systems? Do you have any?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Well, we understand that they have the same ability to, become infected, right? Kim's a school teacher here at Northern Guilford. And so these are, of course, things that we worry about. My mom's a school teacher. She's worried about going back in person and everything else. I think the biggest thing is the just the understanding that we have to be safe and clear about, and very deliberate, right? So people with a big herd mentality and a group mentality will respond to things that are sensible and clear. When there is questions about something and it goes back and forth on two sides and there's not a right answer, not really sure yet, and there's got people voting for one thing, other people voting for another, it creates more concern. Of course, children have a much less risk of becoming ill or having a severe complication from it. It does occur, but my worry would be, the third, the second, third graders that live with their 75-year-old grandparents, right? That's my concerns. It's not what would happen to maybe that situation, or the, almost ready to retire school teachers that may have, diabetes and hypertension and are putting themselves at risk in those kind of situations. And I don't know how they can make those decisions carefully. Think about the bus drivers, right? You got to think about everybody else, right? How I don't know how they're going to do that. And I think that is one of the reasons why several of the counties have opted for 9 weeks of virtual stuff while they start to think about how they're moving forward. I don't know what the right answer is. I think that the virtual learning is a good way to start and to see where we are headed. And they're going to have to take that on a county by county basis. But once, there's actually a lot of data tracking that goes on in behind this. And our health system already has and the CDC already had a data tracking system. I saw a lot of information that was being distributed that was just completely wrong when all of this first started, about people commenting on stuff on social media and everything about, why is it taking so long for them to put these systems together to understand how they're tracking COVID and all this other stuff? It's just totally wrong. During the flu seasons, hospitals regularly get live stream data from the CDC on, volumes of influenza-like illnesses that come in. so we can make appropriate planning for hospital capacities and beds. I mean, of course it was new, and the system was, kind of overwhelmed at first because they're having to access more data and start grouping it together, I'm sure. But those kind of systems are there, right? That's something that, our country does. And I'm sure that it was obviously a surprise or more work than the CDC had planned for those kind of things. But, I'm not involved in that, but we do have those kind of systems in place. And as for school systems, I don't know. I don't know how you plan for that. And do I think they need to go back? I think kids at this age and this generation are totally going to be affected by how that occurs, because I can see it in my own child. He's not been in any kind of directed kind of instruction, and he just doesn't listen to mom and dad, but he will listen to Miss Robinson, which was at his preschool. And let me tell you, sometimes we have honestly threatened to call Miss Robinson to say that, Grant, do you need me to call Miss Robinson? And let me tell you, I don't know what she did for that 9 months of time that she was with him last year, but that's all it took for her to understand that Miss Robinson was very important, and that, so those kind of interaction and that kind of understanding is, I know that he's going to be set back because of that, but you know how wild he is. Everybody remembers he has not slowed down at all. So he needs more iron fist Miss Robinson in the world.
So Bradley, what does your gut tell you? Are we going to see a second wave of this come cold and flu season? And two-part question. I know I didn't see a crystal ball on your bookshelf over there when you panned over. And is there a possibility? I mean, isn't it a possibility? And I hate to speak bad things out into the universe, but we could possibly look at a COVID-21. There could be another strand or something. I mean,
So there already are several strands. It's already, I believe, I don't remember the website exactly, but there's a couple of virology researchers that are publishing their data live as they collect things. So I remember one of them that I looked at several months back. I believe there was already maybe 5 to 6 varying strands already in the United States. They are from the same original virus. You just have to understand that the concept of a virus is confusing a little bit, because it's not a necessary live organism like a bacteria is. They're so much smaller, right? So a bacteria is something that you could grow on a plate and that you could look at under a microscope and visually see this little organism move on a plate or move on a slide. Viruses are many times thousands smaller than that. And that's one of the differences in how it spreads, right? Because it's so much smaller, it can actually, become aerosolized and float in the air. And, you've seen all of these concepts about whether or not how it's spread and droplets and stuff. And, well, if doctors have to wear masks and respirators and all this kind of stuff, why should I have to wear a regular mask in public? Well, regular mask in public is really just to help prevent droplet exposure, right? So has anybody ever had to clean their the inside of their car windshield, right? You ever wondered why there's all those grody dots all over that? Well, that's you talking to your car speakerphone while you're driving down the road and flicking all that stuff on the inside of the window, right? That's all of the spray that comes out of your mouth. And then I'm looking at my own computer screen and see all the little dots now that are all over my computer screen because I'm sitting here talking to it. that's the same thing. We, when we articulate and speak and we sing and with Melissa, then she's like, we need that T sound, we gotta, that's that tongue on the back of the teeth that puts all of that out. And wearing a mask doesn't bother your ability to breathe. It doesn't retain CO2. It doesn't do any of those things. Your body is way too high functioning to let that kind of stuff happen. First of all, your brain is what controls all of those levels. Okay. People think your lungs do that. No, your brain tells your lungs what to do. And so that's just not going to happen. But what it does do is it prevents the person that could be an asymptomatic carrier of COVID, that could be talking to you at the checkout line at, Kroger, and they may not know it because they picked it up from their kindergartner that just went back to school. And what that does is that doesn't allow that kind of transmission of droplets from their mouth to, landing on you somewhere. And so if we could just reduce those kind of events, those reduce the overall type of events. Because if you had someone that was highly infectious, just one person presumptively infected, 40 some people in a church choir or whatever a long time ago. And we've had the same situations. We've had back home, my parents in Western North Carolina, a church decided to continue to have regular inpatient in service and or regular service inside, and kind of felt like there was a lot of kind of hype against this to push back, right? And but after having 2 church members die from it, and nearly 25 or more sick in the congregation, that really changed behavior, right? And I tried not to get involved in stuff, but I wasn't real happy about everything that was going on back in the church that I grew up in. And so I had to I just called, and I just wanted to know what their thoughts were, and talk to a couple of people, and that was that was after this situation had happened to a neighboring church, and they made the decision, of course, that probably wasn't the right thing. And we hate that, because all of us are social people, right? My child is one of those. Everybody knows Grant. So that's his thing. And we were in the drive-through at Chick-fil-A. This is sad, but it's kind of funny too. But he was in the back seat, and he could see people on the sidewalk. And he was yelling from the back seat that he wanted the window rolled down so he could say hi. And he just because, and we rolled the window down. He said hi to everybody. His name was Grant, and just wanted to say hi, because we were plenty, of course, way away from people. But it just gives the idea that kids also right now just don't understand why they're not able to have that kind of social interaction. And that's part of why school is important too. But I don't know how we're all going to do that safely right now.
You still didn't answer the question.
My
Do you
opinion.
think there's going to be a resurgence in the fall or winter?
Yeah. Thank you for my direction again. Sorry. That's a good question. I think it's probably going to stay sustained if we are able to do what we're continuing doing now. I mean, at least in our area, the spread rates and what we look at is something called an R value. That's something that's also probably published by the local Health and Human Services. If those go negative for several days, it will show a decreasing in the spread rates. If we continue to do that, I think that we'll probably leave us at kind of a steady influx of patients. If you're able to go to a negative value for a long period of time, and for this one, you would expect somewhere around 14 to 21 days, because we're not really sure how long patients may be contagious even after they may still have viral shedding and stuff like that. So we're we're going to make the assumption of 14 days because that's what we were doing for quarantine times. If we could do that and it was negative for those period of time, then at some point we're going to get to a level in which there will be no additional kind of like epidemic spread or community spread. I don't know how long that's going to take. And that's obviously going to depend upon a few things, but we can look at our own hospital data and see admission rates for daily admission rates. And you can count back 7 days prior to each of those peaks, and they all follow certain categories. One of them was Memorial Day weekend, following the, and then like 2 weeks, less than a week after that, 7 days later from the following was like the protesting and all the stuff for the George Floyd. And then also from like July the 4th, you can kind of, it's not direct correlates, but you can kind of see those spikes of increases in volumes. It's hard to say whether they're not, because a lot of our volumes are just like everybody else, because you may have a large mass of patients from a nursing home or something like that skews that kind of data. I think that those facilities and places like that are really going to be on lockdown for a long time. I don't know how we're going to get away from that. The future wave, there was a lot of stuff a couple of weeks ago about in the news media about experiencing a second wave when there was more stuff going on in Florida and that kind of thing. That's not the second wave. We're still all in the first one, right? We're a long way away from even seeing what that looks like, we did a lot of worrying and a lot of anxiety and a lot of hype at the very beginning. And now we're slowly learning to live with it. And that slow portion of learning to live with it is trying to keep this thing, as level and flat as we can. But it'll continue to be here and spread until there is herd immunity. And probably people have heard that term, herd immunity. Herd immunity is when at least 80+% or more of the population has antibodies to this particular disease. They, even after New York, all of the things that occurred in New York for the very first couple of weeks in March and April, they've done population level studies there already where they take random blood samples from thousands of people. I think one study looked at 30-some thousand people, but only about 13.8 to 14% of people had antibodies out of that random testing. So that's kind of, to me, a little bit terrifying. There's that many people that died in New York, and there's, at a population level, there's a very small amount of antibody. And the next thing, we don't know what happens with those antibodies. We don't know how long you keep them. There's all kinds of unknowns right now. And that's part of that. We'll figure that out too as time goes. The vaccine trials that are going right now, what we do know is there has been some that have shown a response. That response means some patient has got the shot in the arm, and that we wait however many weeks and we recheck their blood and we see if their blood tests show positive antibodies for what we stuck in their arm. Okay. There's all this other hype and fear about complications of vaccines and all this stuff. But remember that the vaccines are being created no differently than the vaccines that we use for everything else that occurs throughout this time. Measles, mumps, and rubella, and Tdap, and of course they're done a little bit differently because some of them are dried inactive viruses, but same thing with like the flu shot and stuff like that. We just don't know what that's going to look like.
I just wanted to thank you for taking time to talk to us tonight. I really appreciate it. When you mentioned the CDC, I know you said something like you really didn't get much involved in that, but since the hospitals now do their reporting to Teletrack through HHS, have you heard any comments from your colleagues? Do they like it better? Is it, do they think it's going to work better? Is it just as good, or have you heard anything at all?
I don't know. A lot of that all just goes, we're like boots on the ground. So like, I have no idea where that stuff disappears to. That goes from, I guess our hospital. So we get daily like updates from North Carolina HHS, right? So I guess that is probably all going through to North Carolina's Department of Health and Human Services. So I guess if they're responsible for all of that, we get most of our data from them daily. There's like a task force. Most hospitals have task force that handle those kind of things. I guess the thing we have to remember from our standpoint, the doc standpoint, Greensboro is a city of 385,000, something like that. And there is probably 12 or 14 lung doctors in Greensboro. So there's not many, right? And so, when you look at the number of patients per physician that are caring for ICU patients, there's just not that many. And the same thing in Roanoke, right? There's probably, I'm trying to think of the faculty there, maybe nine or 10. So there's 9 or 10 pulmonologists in Roanoke, which isn't that many. And now, of course, there's internal medicine docs and there's other physicians in the hospital that care for patients that aren't in intensive care unit. But we really serve as kind of boots on the ground for caring for these people. So from the admin standpoint, I have no idea. I know I saw the news release too. I was the same as you. I don't know we're the same as the lay people when it comes, getting that information about where things are going.
So Bradley, as your pastors and as your church family, you still belong to us. What are you doing to take care of yourself?
Oh, goodness.
That's a pastoral care question. So
it is a good one.
What are you doing for self-care?
Probably can't see on the ends of my fingers or not, but I purchased an acoustic guitar a couple of months ago, so I've been playing a whole lot.
Oh, good.
So I've been I see some thumbs up from Melissa, but
Yeah.
I've been picking up guitar playing a whole lot more recently. So usually on my days off, I'm locked away in a little bit of a quiet space to play for as long as I can. I have Kim that, everybody knows her and her personality, and she keeps me sane. I know that that there's definitely times that I get worked up to the point where I don't know exactly. Sometimes my emotional interaction with the world isn't good. And I don't know how to get that out sometimes. And it's probably a good reason that I married a behavioral specialist for special needs kids. And she uses some of that on me to keep me normal, I think.
Don't make her call Miss Robinson.
I know, right?
Right.
Yeah. So there's
There you go.
plenty of days where that's been helpful. And another good thing is that I work with a really good group of docs, and so that's been helpful to just to have a chance to decompress, and talk about these things, because we have our own group Zoom WebEx meetings, right? Just for us, sometimes even before we have our regular business meeting or anything like that, that folks will share kind of what's happening and doing okay with those things, and having people just kind of call and check on you. Something else that's been really nice, my aunt, my mom's sister, she lives here in Greensboro, and she's always stayed in touch with me some. We weren't always talking to each other or anything like that, but she really has reached out pretty much routinely once every 2 weeks or so just to check in, right? And I told her that the other day, and I was, I told her, I was like, I think you're checking in I mean, I talk to my mom on the phone regularly, but she doesn't necessarily check in to see how I'm doing for the work stuff, right? Because she knows that I try to keep family and work just kind of separate because I'll get burned out if I don't. But it's been, I told her, I was like, Kathy's, really been checking on me and stuff. So it's been nice to have that. Other people reach out too. It's been nice to have, I know that people from church, they've reached out, emails and I've received and text messages and every Sunday, Kim and I, at least the week when I'm not working, we've been having Sunday school with John and Kelly Best. So we've been doing that via Zoom as well.
Great.
Good deal. We have time for one more question. I want to be a good steward of Bradley's time. He's been gracious to us.
Yeah, anything I can help with.
Well, Bradley, it's been great having you. I appreciate you carving out the time to be with us. This has been most informative, and I'm sure there are going to be some other questions that folks will have. Once Bradley gets off, if everybody will stick around, I will give you his cell number, and you feel free to call him anytime after 10 p.m., and he'll get right on top of your questions.
Obviously. No, just some closing things for everybody. I know this is terrifying, right? And I can only imagine, like when I first heard about all of the things and the predictions that we were getting and the info that we were getting, we immediately started thinking about what are we going to do? How are we even going to handle this? And I can only imagine getting tidbits and pieces of information coming at you either from local news or social media or from a friend and trying to interpret that. And, that is one of the things that I think has set our country back some in the fact that we get so many so much quick access to that kind of info, right? We used to not be able to get such mass delivery of communication almost instantaneously. And that's hard when we're trying to filter out what is correct, what's the most accurate for today, because what's most accurate today may not be most accurate tomorrow. Right. And so when that kind of info comes out, so I challenge everybody to adhere to pieces of information that you get from reputable resources. And, I really appreciate Kevin asking me to talk a little bit. I had a discussion this week with a patient in clinic. I had a lot of questions. And she was getting a lot of information from a church group actually, and other people. And I gave her a real simple description, and she looked at me kind of crazy. But sometimes I do these things, and at the time it made sense. I don't know if it makes sense now, but I asked her if my truck broke down, if I was going to take it to a circus to get it fixed. And she looked at me really funny. She was like, "What are you talking about?" I was like, would I take my truck to the circus man to get my circus, to get my truck fixed? And she was like, "No, it doesn't make sense." So I think when it comes to getting healthcare information, we need to focus on getting that information from people that has spent time trying to interpret it and give it out the best we can. It's hard to get that information from a pulpit or from a politician or from any of those folks. And so my only plug is that we definitely try to stick together and think about where we're getting it and try not to get too frustrated with the information that we do get, because it may be different than what the next person said. But I think that all of the state's health departments are trying to do the best they can, following some basic guidelines. Your primary care doctors, I'm sure, are getting plenty of questions, all that kind of stuff. There's plenty of information now on pretty much every hospital website, and those kind of things. We wouldn't be publicizing, we'd be talking about it. It wouldn't be on everybody's entrance to the door to any department store now if it wasn't a real thing. So, just everybody continue to, in North Carolina, we're doing the 3 W's, which is wait, wash, and wear a mask. Wait, wash, and wear. So, those kind of things will help everybody doing our part. And I think that it's not just a political thing or anything else like that. It's what can we do to help our fellow mankind, because we're going to be living with this and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. So we just got to learn how to be a part of it.
Well said, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Can we offer a blessing
Thank
on
you,
you before we
Bradley.
go?
Yeah, of course.
God, I just pray for Bradley. I pray for all of our frontline workers. I pray for Cindy and for David and for everybody who is right there on the cutting edge of this. And Lord, we've prayed and asked for healing for our country in so many ways. There's so many viruses that we're dealing with. But God, we just ask for protection around these folks. We ask for this to end quickly, but ultimately, we just trust in you and rest in you. So thank you for Bradley's time, for his wisdom. Bless his family. Lord, and I just thank you for this time that we get to see each other's faces, even if it's on a flat screen. And so bless our time, bless our evening, and we ask this in Christ's strong name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.